Hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. I'm Tony D. Welcome back to Tony D's Music Channel. And today I want to celebrate 44 years of this classic Paul McCartney masterpiece album, Tug of War, released back in April 1982, celebrating 44 years now. And before I talk about the music, I gotta talk about what led to this album being made and the story of what Paul was going through before it was made. We all know that in 1980, two very tragic things happened to Paul. Well, one more tragic than the other one, but he was arrested in Japan during what was supposed to be a Wings tour, and a big part of that is why Wings broke up. And then in December of that year, December 8th, of course, was the unfortunate, awful murder of John Lennon by a maniac. And now, before, of course, John Lennon's murder, Paul already started working on this album. And, after the Beatles broke up, Paul was still great friends with George Martin, who was the producer of all the Beatles albums in the 60s. And Paul said to George one night, "Hey, will you produce my next album?" And George Martin said yes, with a few conditions. First of all, he told him that he would look at the 14 songs he just written and give them each a grade. He told them 4 of them were great, 6 of them needed some work, and that 4 of them were no good at all. He just throw away. And for the first time in maybe 15, 18 years, Paul had to audition for somebody, George Martin. Paul and George always had this sort of student and professor relationship. He was born in 1926, so he was 16 years older than Paul, about 14, 17 years older than all the Beatles, And every Wings album was produced by Paul in some way. Back to the Egg, of course, was co-produced by Paul and co-produced by Chris Thomas. The others were produced by Paul himself. So he didn't have to compete for somebody's attention on any of those albums. And, fascinatingly, there were 2 cases in the early 70s where somebody was going to produce an album of Paul's, but then they left, while recording Ram. This guy, Jim Gierko, who would produce Chicago albums, was going to join him to produce that album. But I think he left because it was his honeymoon or something. I forget the exact story. And then Glenn Johns was going to produce Red Rose Speedway. But then he just quit because he felt that Paul and the other members of Wings were just lazing around, not doing much, and smoking a lot of reefer. But anyway, the relationship between Paul and George Martin is what made this album so classic. Because George Martin wasn't really a fan of Paul recording with Wings, and he told him, "Paul, you don't need to record with these guys just because they're here. You can record with the best musicians available." And so he told Paul this, and I think in the back of Paul's mind, he thought, well, okay, it seems like a good idea. And because of that, of course, Steve Howe, Lawrence Juber, and Denny Lane were not needed for the album, and they just took their walking papers, and they were no longer members of Paul's band, and they just left. And then he had very prestigious, experienced, and famous musicians on the album instead of those guys. And I think it's kind of like back in 62 or so when the Beatles wanted to fire Pete Best and then hire Ringo in the band. They didn't have the courage or the heart to tell Pete Best themselves, so they had Brian Epstein, their manager, do it. It's kind of like the same thing here. Paul didn't want to say to Steve Howley and Juber and Denny Lane, "I don't want you guys in my band anymore. I don't want to do Wings anymore." He didn't want to say all those things. Instead, he had George Martin be the bad guy and say it. Because I think in Paul's mind, he wanted to be solo instead of with Wings. at least since 79 or so. And I think he used George Martin as an excuse to say, I don't want to do Wings anymore. That's, I think he was afraid of confrontation, so George Martin was the deputation to get rid of Wings and for Paul to be solo again. Now, I love Wings. I love the members of Wings. I really do. I mean this with no offense, no disregard for those guys at all. But I think the fact that they were not on this album is what makes it such a classic masterpiece. And I'm actually glad that George Martin made that move in a sense, because that made Paul's post 1980 work just so brilliant. And, because those albums are Paul solo, not Paul in a band like Wings, I think that made the songs more mature because he was growing older. He was more mature, more adult. And it does kind of give it more variety because they don't all need to be typical catchy pop rock songs. They can be whatever kind of songs he wants, and he can have whatever musician he wants on different songs. And yeah, I just gotta mention some of the very famous musicians who were on the album. Steve Gadd played drums on a few tracks, and he's acquainted with playing with the Beatles because he was the drummer on Ringo Starr's album Ringo the Fourth, number 7. I believe he was the drummer on the classic Paul Simon hit 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. And you had Eric Stewart from the group 10cc doing just achingly beautiful background vocals and harmonies, along with Linda McCartney, of course. You had Carl Perkins guest star on a track and duet with Paul. You had Stevie Wonder guesting on 2 tracks or duet. You had Ringo Starr himself, of course, Paul's friend and former bandmate, playing drums on 2 tracks, Take It Away, and also Wanderlust. But anyway, enough about that history. Let's get into the songs themselves, because of course it starts off with the classic title track, Tug of War. And Paul has said that it's all about how life is viewed as a tug of war, not really talking about war itself in terms of politics, in terms of hand-to-hand combat war, but just life. And I don't know about all of you, but it's kind of hard to listen to the song and not think that it's Paul commenting about John Lennon as well. I mean, I think it was started before John died, but we know that when they were in the Beatles, John and Paul had a very competitive relationship. John was a very jealous person, would not dole out praise to others very often because that would mess with his ego. And in the last 2 or 3 years of the Beatles, he was very jealous because Paul always got the A side of the singles, whereas he would get the B side. For example, Paul had Hello Goodbye on the A side. The B side was John's I'm the Walrus. Hey Jude was Paul's A side. John had Revolution as the B side. He really wanted Revolution to be the A side. He didn't get that. Get Back was the Paul song on the A side, and John's B side was Don't Let Me Down. That was one area of competition for him, and that's reflected in this song. And it starts off with this recording of an actual tug of war, the game, where you pull on rope. But anyway, let's dissect these lyrics here. It's a tug of war. What with one thing and another, it's a tug of war. We expected more, but with one thing and another, we were trying to outdo each other in the tug of war. That sounds like it's about Paul and John. Now this part's more about like global tug of wars. In another world, we could stand on top of the mountain with our flag unfurled. In a time to come, we'll be dancing to the beat of a different drum. It's a tug of war. I know I mustn't crumble. It's a tug of war. I can't let go. If I do, the whole thing is gonna crumble in the tug of war. Pushing and pulling in years to come. They may discover what the air we breathe and the life we lead is all about. But it won't be soon enough. No, it won't be soon enough for me. Easily one of the top 20 best Paul McCartney songs ever. I love how Martin's orchestral arrangement just soars at that part of the song. I absolutely love that so much. Yeah, like I said, that first verse I think is about John and Paul's competitive relationship. The second and third verse I think is more about political competitiveness and political wars, and he's warning against wars as a rule, which is great, obviously. Now, Tug of War was one of the 3 singles from the album, which I think was a huge mistake, because when you're releasing a single, you want to release something that's going to be played on the radio a lot, that's going to be catchy and upbeat. This is not a catchy, upbeat song, Paul. Why did you release it as a single? It's like when John Lennon released the song Love as a single. Well, Love is a brilliant song, but it's a very quiet, tender ballad. That's not going to play well on the radio. So the single was only 53 on the singles charts. And I'll get to track 2. And this is the track where guest vocalist Eric Stewart absolutely shines. Now, Take It Away, I think, once again, is a song that pays tribute to the Beatles, because it's all about this story song about a fictional band who's performing and performing a concert, and luckily for them, there's an impresario in the audience who sees them and signs them, very similar to the Beatles with Brian Epstein, just magically seeing them and making them famous. And everything about this song is just, it's magic, it's phenomenal, it's absolutely amazing, it's perfect. Paul's bass grooves are so groovy and so full and so, his vocals are just top notch. You got Steve Gadd and Ringo on the drums. You've got George Martin even doing piano like he did on a few Beatles songs. And then by the second half of the song, you got Eric Stewart, you got Linda just killing it on the harmonies. I can't do it. I can't copy what they did. But this song it's just killer. And rightfully, it was a top 10 hit single, I believe, in America, and then the UK charts had it number 15. So yeah, kudos to Take It Away. I already did a video about that just earlier, so check that one out. And I gotta talk about another of my favorites on the third track. I mentioned this in another video about Paul's songs for lonely people, called Somebody Who Cares. I mean, this song is just, it's so lovely. Somebody Who Cares, it's got lyrics about the importance of having somebody to lean on. When somebody has taken the wheels of your brand new bike and you've got nowhere to go, there's always somebody who cares. But how will we find you? How will we know your whereabouts? And there's a musician on here who plays the flute. And there's a fascinating story about how, Paul McCartney did not know how to read music notation. So he couldn't tell him using notes what to play. So he would just hum to him how he wanted it to sound. And luckily it turned out so well. But I wanted to mention a quote in this book about the song, because I believe that because this was right after the unfortunate death of John Lennon, that Paul was thinking about that while he was writing the song. And he does say here in an interview from Newsweek, I did not have him in mind, but I remember being aware of John's death while writing the song. And I think either A, this song was about the fact that John was somebody who needed other people to lean on, or the fact that Paul needed somebody to lean on after his death. I think it could be the latter. I really do. And I was 23 when I discovered this album, and I remember just being absolutely floored and stunned at this notion that Paul was somebody who needed somebody to lean on, and he needed somebody who cares, because he was always around people. He never really seemed lonely. But this is right after what happened to John, obviously. And like I was saying before, this album, George Martin gave Paul the right to have different kinds of musicians on the album, which means different kind of songs. And the next track is completely different, to quote Monty Python. The next track, of course, is What's That You're Doing, a duet with Paul and Stevie Wonder. It's a very funky song with excellent sexual double entendres in the lyrics. Stevie Wonder is just awesome on this song. I love it so much. What's that you're doing? Girl, like when you do it to me. Girl, like when you do it to me. One of those songs you could just put on the record player while you're making love with somebody. I love it. And of course, we then follow up with a very heartfelt tribute to John with Here Today, where Paul wanted to write a fictional conversation between him and John. And if I said, I really loved you and was glad you came along here today, well, I suppose, what about the time we met? Would you say that we were just playing hard to get? Didn't understand a word, but you were always there with a smile. And what about the night we cried? 'Cause there's no more reason to hold it all inside. If you were here today, you were in my heart. Here today. It's Paul on guitar, plus the gorgeous orchestral arrangement arranged by the great George Martin. And it's the kind of thing that could bring tears to your eyes if you're that kind of person. Paul's played it live in concert over the past many years. It's a real treat to see. Of course he had to write this. Of course he did. He had to say something. I like this song a lot more than I like George's tribute to John all those years ago. That song is, catchy and upbeat, whereas this song is more quiet and tender. It is strange that George would have written a song like all those years ago, which is very melodic, as opposed to this song that's just tender and quiet. Then we go to a song that harkens back to Paul's childhood again with Ballroom Dancing. And there's a great story about this because when they were young teens, George and Paul would go to this ballroom dancing place with the goal in mind of meeting girls and seducing girls, which didn't work out, but they still had fun waltzing. And it's a really cool song. You wouldn't expect a song about dancing to rock so much. And it has very nonsensical lyrics. When I was a pup going down the old china cup, out of my back pocket, ballroom dancing made a man of me. I got what I got from ballroom dancing, Big BD. Well, we used to fight like cats and dogs, but we made it up on the ballroom dancing. Now, the next track was inspired by Paul seeing financial news. And of course, it's The Pound is Sinking. And he does so well when he creates one song out of two little song fragments in this one. The pound is sinking, the euro's falling. Yeah, it's a really good song. I love ballroom dancing. I'm sorry, The Pound is Sinking. It's so hot in here, it's hard to think. But then the second part of the song is this song called It Didn't Happen, and he combined those two together. Yeah, it's a really, really cool song. And now we're getting to one of the best songs on here, and that's called Wanderlust. Wanderlust, I can tell you, was inspired because while Paul was making the Wings out in London town, they were on different yachts, and of course, Paul being Paul had to have cannabis with him on the yacht. But this captain guy didn't want that at all. He was being very aggressive. Didn't want Paul smoking cannabis. But then he went on another yacht called Wanderlust, where he found freedom from that guy who wouldn't let him cannabis. That's what Wanderlust is all about. But I remember, my first listen to this song, I didn't think about that at all. It doesn't sound like it's about that. The song reads more like a love song, or I thought for a while it was about Paul's drug bust in Japan, but it's not. Lied out Wanderlust, head out to the sea. Captain says there'll be a bust. This one's not for me. Lied out Wanderlust. Light out Wanderlust. Now's the time to break free. Wanderlust be gone. Take us to the sea. Oh, my love, what petty crime did I commit? What better time to find a brand new day? This is one of the tracks on the album that Ringo played drums on. He does a really fantastic job with typical Ringo fills. And again, the harmonies on this song are outstanding. Paul's harmonies, he double tracked himself doing harmonies, so he's harmonizing with himself on this song. That's just outstanding. And I mentioned before about how Tug of War, the song, was a single. Big mistake, Paul. Wanderlust also could have made a better single, but the best choice for a third single would have been Ballroom Dancing, because a single should be a commercial, upbeat song if you want to get the most radio play. You don't want to put a real tender, quiet song as a single, do you? No, you don't. You want that. But yeah, Wanderlust is a classic, a very underrated classic. I mean, it's not underrated now, but it was underrated when I discovered it. And the fact that it's not a single made underrated. And now we get to my least favorite track on the album. It's the duet with a hero to Paul and George and the other Beatles, Carl Perkins, song called Get It. To be honest with you, I don't get it. I don't get what makes this song so great. I don't really get what, yeah. Okay song, it's okay, it's decent, but I don't get much out of it, honestly. I just don't. I think I prefer the other song that Carl Perkins did with Paul, called My Old Friend. Imagine if that was on the album. But that's Carl Perkins solo, it's not Carl Perkins and Paul. But yeah, Get It, it's okay. It's just, to me, it's just a filler on the album. There are so many Paul songs I prefer to be on this album. Like the non-album B-side Rain Clouds or I'll Give You a Ring, that would be better on the album. But Get It, it's kind of boring. And then it ends, and thank goodness it does. Because then you get Be What You See, which is a very bizarre track for Paul. Yeah, it's like 50 seconds of electronica stuff on guitar. Just be what you see. Just meant as a link between the Get It song and the next song. But it's really cool. And then, of course, we get the very funky Dress Me Up as a Robber, where Paul's singing about different perceptions of people. Dress me up as a robber, that's what you see. You can dress me up however you want. It's that kind of thing. It's very cool. I love that one. And then, of course, we get to the number one hit smash single, Ebony and Ivory. And, I got this Russian import of the album, and they spelled it Ebony and Ivory. I guess that's how Russians spell ivory. I got this from my local record store here, and it's a very proud item. But yeah, everybody knows Ebony and Ivory already. I don't really need to delve into it. Although I do like the story about how Paul wrote it, how he was having an argument with Linda one day, and then he just saw the piano and thought, huh, I can't get it right. But the keys on the keyboard, they get it right so easily, the black and white keys. Yeah, again, I'm not going to say anything bad about this song. I love Ebony and Ivory. Go together on my piano, oh Lord, why can't we live together in perfect harmony? Side by side on my piano, oh Lord, why can't we? We both know that people are the same wherever you go. There is good and bad in everyone. And then Stevie comes in. We can learn to live when we learn to give each other what we need to survive together alive. You know, say it's cheesy, say it's corny, I don't care. I love this song. I love it. The album opens with Tug of War, a song about competitiveness in relationships, and a song about nations at war. And then it ends with Ebony Ivory, a song that calls for an end to racial bigotry, racial hatred, all those things, and calls for peace between different races. So it's perfect having one song at the beginning and one song at the end. Absolutely perfect. There you have it, folks. My thoughts on all these songs on Tug of War album, turning 44 this year. And, I would rank the Tug of War album as my number 4 favorite Paul McCartney album. But even though I say that, I would also say that those 4 albums, my top 4, are really all tied for number 1. It's just one big album tie. So, this is the masterpiece album. I think the other albums, my top 4, are also masterpieces. Flaming Pie, Ram, and Chaos. In no particular order. Well, there is an order to it, really. Anyway, um, yeah, I have much more to say right now. That's all I gotta say. I'm gonna wrap this up. Those are all my thoughts on Tug of War. It's a militant album. It's a pun. It's a militantly brilliant masterpiece album, and let me know how high you rate the album, and if you think it's a masterpiece as well. All right, signing off.